Hello, everyone, and welcome to our desktop community stand-up. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Olia Gavrish, and I have Dmitry Lyanin with me. So,
Hi there, everybody.
very quick introductions. I am a .NET PM, focusing on .NET Desktop, so working on WinForms, WPF, .NET Core, .NET 5, porting from Framework to .NET Core and .NET 5, and so on. And Dmitry, tell us, what
Yeah,
do you do?
so I get the pleasure to work with this awesome team, including you. So I'm a PM that spans both the desktop tooling for XAML applications for WPF and UWP, but I also more recently am now working on the Xamarin Forms project, and in the future is going to be called the Maui project. So basically,
Yeah.
wherever XAML developers are, I have probably something to do with it at this point.
Yes, and we got a response already that audio is good, but if you could volume up yourself, Dmitry, or just talk louder, that would be good. Great.
I can definitely talk
Oh,
louder.
yeah, I can hear that. All right, so today we have all episode about XAML tooling. We have so many new features and improvements, and with that, I probably just give the stage to Dmitry and let you tell us about it. Go
Sure, sounds
ahead.
good. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll probably should talk about the community launch first. So I'll bring that up.
Oh, that's a great idea. For that, do you want to tell us about it, or I can go ahead?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So basically, great event happened just a few weeks ago. I believe that's a second annual event hosted by UWP Community Discord server, and that's when all UWP developers were preparing their applications. And they've released in Microsoft Store 12 new applications and two refactored, updated apps. And this is the website. Go ahead, check it out. It's extremely interesting. And there's also a blog post. Dmitry, do you have a blog post handy? I
Yeah,
think it's
so
on your.
there's a blog post right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here you can read briefly about UWP community and the launch event itself, but also it has the descriptions of all the applications. So they're great apps such as Chaptifier that allows you to add titles to your MP3 files. Yeah, if we go lower, there's File UWP, which is a modern file explorer that pushes the boundaries of the platform, as they say. And there are many more. Just go ahead, check it out. I was very amazed by this event, and that's the second time it happens. Great kudos to the community. Keep it up. Give us more amazing UWP apps.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for everybody that participates
Yes.
in these events. It really warms our heart to see the tools being used to create such great applications, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, well, today is all about XAML, so I'm going to do a bunch of talking. We wanted to just kind of come back around and talk about the most recent preview releases of what we're calling 16.7, which is the most recent preview release of Visual Studio. But what I find is still some people don't know exactly what I'm talking about when I say like Visual Studio preview release or Visual Studio preview features that are experimental. So I want to talk about that just for 1 second, and then we'll jump into the actual content that I meant to present. So I just want to point out that Visual Studio comes in, let's call it, different flavors. You can download the stable version, or you can download the preview version. And since 2019, at least 2019, maybe this was the previous version as well, 2017, but definitely since 2019, you can install it side by side, which means you can have the stable version and the pre-release version on the same machine. And asterisk, most things should work just fine. I've never had an issue because of it, but certainly keep your eyes open just in case. But when you do have the preview version installed, you get access to everything that we put into our release notes. So we have preview release notes, and these release notes list out all the changes that are in that preview release. And there's usually quite a bit of changes. And what I want to point out is that the previews come in different versions as well. So when we start to say that 16.7 is released as a preview, we call that preview 1. And after that, we'll have many other previews, typically somewhere between 3, 4, 5 previews. And after that, there'll be a release candidate. And after that, the feature will be called released, at which point a new preview will come out of the next version, 16.8. So right now we have preview 1 out, preview 2 out, and preview 3 out. So that's why I'm kind of clicking through these release notes to show you that each release has its own sections, but they're cumulative. So at the end of the day, as long as you install preview 3, you have all the previous features as well. And one other last thing I want to point out about preview features is that when you install a preview, and you know you're in a preview by the top right preview indicator in Visual Studio, you don't get all the features turned on out of the box. That's because we consider some features as experimental or just not ready for consumption as a thing we push on you even in a preview release. So the way you can find those particular features is you go to Options. So you go to Tools, Options, and then you click on preview features right here. So there's a preview feature section under environment, and this preview section is an ever-growing list of things that we'd like for you to try. A lot of things can just be turned on and used. Some things require a restart. For XAML, there's a lot of features in here that are actually preview features. So please check it out. And we're constantly looking to hear feedback from you. So if you find something in this experience that I just showed you confusing, please file a VS feedback issue. We are listening and trying to make this experience better. So that's kind of what I wanted to recap. So now I'm going to switch gears back to the main presentation that I was going to do today and talk to you about the new features inside of 16.7. So we'll lean pretty heavily into like the most recent things that we've released, but I just want to go through it from the beginning to say that in preview 1, we started to release our new features in here. So if you scroll down to our WPF UWP tooling section, you'll see that we added a color visualizer for XAML, this little color indicator next to all the XAML tags. And in each preview, we make it support more and more scenarios. And this is something that's supported across WPF and Xamarin Forms today, and we're having some performance issues on the UWP side, unfortunately. So we're still working to get that up and running, but we are working on making sure this is universal for all XAML code editing experiences on Windows, at least where I'm representing things today. We also shipped a new data binding failure experience. If you missed this, definitely check it out. This is our ability to show you if a binding has failed in your application through a new icon in the in-app toolbar and a new panel which you can pin at both runtime and when you're not running the application, and you can see in real time or in retrospect to the previous session what bindings have failed that normally would only be accessible in the output window. So this is like two features combined into one experience. If you click on the icon, the panel opens up, so it's really easy to go from one to the other. And if you have no binding failures, this icon just stays neutral. If you have at least one or two, as of preview 3, we actually show you the number, and hopefully that gives you some helpful information to make sure you don't miss any unexpected binding failures. I have a few apps where a few binding failures are expected, but if the number goes above that, then I know something is wrong. So that's how I keep an eye on it.
What's the biggest number it can show?
It can go up to 99, but the tooltip will always show maximum, the actual number. So it will go 99 plus. That's how you know you have a lot of binding failures.
Less depressing than 1035, right?
yeah, it might be a lot more than 99, but we decided the icon and the text can only get so big there.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So another feature that I'll show you here is suggested actions for the designer, something actually Oli and I are working on together. It's the ability to click on any of the controls that are in box with Visual Studio. I think text blocks, buttons, grids, etc. And we'll provide you most commonly used properties right there through the light bulb experience. This is a feature that we're putting quite a lot of kind of behind the scenes time into making sure it works really great and it has extensibility. And one of the new features we are actually starting to release is the extensibility framework for it. So control vendors will be able to add their own information into here as well. So you can get support for third-party controls, not just first-party controls, which we're going to optimize for in the beginning. So this is a preview feature right there. And finally, the last one from preview 1 was something that we're continuing from previous releases. In fact, suggested actions has been around also since the previous release. You'll find that we keep some preview features from release to release. So that's normal until we feel ready. They're going to stay under feature flag. We don't want anybody to get affected by a feature we don't think is ready. So another one of these preview features is the new XAML designer for .NET Framework applications. This is the way that you sort of get the newest features that we're building into the designer for a .NET Framework WPF project. If you install that, if you use .NET Core, new designer is the designer. If you have .NET Framework, it's an actual different code base. It's a different designer. And we're working to make the new one available for all developers. The reason why it's under preview is because we suspect that there are some things that will still break. So please help us test this and let us know if something is breaking. And also third-party vendors need to do some work to support the new designer. So think like control vendors, Telerik, Infragistics, DevExpress, etc. Right? Just those are 3 random examples where if they don't do the work, it's not going to work in the designer. So
Yeah,
that's one.
I just wanted to add that if you are developing third-party controls, then go ahead, check out this designer, make sure everything works. If it doesn't, please reach out to us. Let us know what's blocking you, because we want to make sure that all the control vendors are able to successfully move to the new designer before we pull the plug on the old one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you the community are also our vendors, right? In a way, like you make projects all the time that extend Visual Studio. Please let us know if something isn't working. We want to support everybody, including you as well. It's not only about like big companies in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so then in preview 2 of 16.7, we added an extensibility improvement. So I'm not going to go into that detail. It affects usually a smaller number of people. But if this release note here is interesting you, definitely check out some of the links that are in the release notes for it under the section. So you'd have to go under, scroll into the preview 2 release notes here. So it's kind of buried in there. Eventually, it'll be all together in the final release note. And then what we're here to talk about today, let's talk about what is in preview 3. So typically, some insider baseball in Visual Studio, we try not to ship new features in every single preview, because if we did that, we'd never stabilize. And therefore, we typically ship the first 2 previews with features that are new potentially or experimental even. And then we spend the rest of the previews and release candidates stabilizing. In this case, we had a little bit more time because of scheduling nuances. So we decided to allow preview 3 to have new features. And that's why today I'm going to talk about some features that only shipped in preview 3 of 16.7 for Visual Studio. So with that, let's go into what the features are. And I'm going to say that these are the release notes. The descriptions are here. I just wanted to point that out, but I'm just going to show it to you right in the product, and we'll make sure I don't miss anything by looking at release notes towards the end. So let me go ahead and switch to my little application. So first of all, this sample app that I'm building, I'll put a link to it at the end into our show notes. This is an open source app that I'm just building for fun to demonstrate design time data, one of our newest features. But before I talk about that particular feature, let me show you something else that I'll just use this sample to help me demonstrate. So I'm going to start Visual Studio. And I'm going to show you a bunch of small improvements. So one of the improvements that we did was recently is, well, let me take a step back and say, this is a journey. We've been improving the in-app toolbar. And when I say in-app toolbar, I mean this toolbar at the top of the application. We've been improving it for now many releases. We're constantly trying to make it better. Please keep your feedback coming if we're making your life worse and not better, if you have ideas. But basically, some of the things we added in the past were like the ability to move it. Sometimes it would block something that you wanted to see, or some button that you wanted to click on, so we made it movable, and it's collapsible. But in this release, we've made it shorter. And the reason why we made it shorter is before, if it was in this position, it would typically go just big enough to start blocking buttons and menus below it. It was kind of really annoying, so we decided to shorten the bar, and by shortening it in a WPF app now, it stays in the title bar, assuming you have kind of a standard looking app. But if you don't, it's collapsible. So if you click collapse, we hide the hide reload text. We keep the icons, hide reload available, unavailable. That's a relatively new icon. Binding failures in the buttons. Then you click it again, and we hide it into a little dot. And then you can click expand, and it expands. And I also want to point out, it's really easy to remove this toolbar temporarily if you want to. Inside of the live visual tree, there's a show runtime tools and applications button. If you click that button, it goes away. And then if you click it again, it comes back. So there you go. That's a couple of really, really small improvements there. Now, next, what I'll demonstrate is colors. One of the things that we talked about a second ago is the color visualizer. So I'm going to switch to a different sample app just because it'll make my life a little bit easier. Unless I'm lying to myself, I need a color. 1 second, we'll find a color. I know I had colors this morning. Let's open this up. And we're still fixing some of the bugs around colors. So if I'm having trouble here, interesting. Okay, let's try this.
That's what preview versions are for, right?
Yeah.
To make sure you don't relax, you don't feel too comfortable.
Yeah, this is annoying, but yeah, we definitely have colors. Something is not working for me. But yeah, we basically have color visualizers, and I can switch back to the screenshots that we have in preview 1 just to show that again. So I'll scroll down to color visualizer. I think they were
in the beginning of the blog post.
Yeah. Yes, 1 second. So we've made improvements. One of the things that we've improved in this release is that we support resource dictionaries now. That's why I found this color visualizer release note. But then we'll jump down. There you go. So there's the screenshot of what it should look like. We actually in the next preview already have even more bug fixes for where this works. Definitely very useful. I love having these features. I've used extensions that's given this to me now, and this thing is going to be in the box. So there you go. We have that now. And with that, I'm going to switch over to my next demo, which is another app, which again is open source, just a little test app that we built out, and we'll put a link into the show note to it. But this app simply is an app of broken things, broken dreams. It has nothing but binding failures. The whole point of this application is to show the binding failure experience and nothing else. So in the past, like let's go back to the world before we had all of this technology. Let's turn off our in-app toolbar. Let's go back to our output window. This was the experience you had before we added this feature. Before we improved binding failures, you would have no indication right now when your app is running, unless you visually noticed it in your running application that some binding has failed. And then your output window would have that information, but to get to it, you would be scrolling through, and you hopefully wouldn't miss binding failures like I'm showing you right here, but it's easy enough to miss it. There's quite a lot of information here. So we've tried to make this better by first of all adding this icon into the in-app toolbar. As you see when I highlight the icon, I get the total number of binding failures. And then if I want to get to the new experience that shows that failure information in a detailed way, I click on the icon. And now I have a panel that I could pin. It's a regular panel that respects all of your decisions. If you close it or if you pin it, it will stay where you want it. And this panel has all the details of what is happening. It also does a couple of unique things that we couldn't simply do before in the output window. One of them is combine duplicates. So let me do this. Let me clear the binding failures. That's something you can always do. And click on new person, which will cause a few bindings to fail. Now, as you see, every one of these binding failures is unique at this point. But if I click add another person, a few are going to be unique to that execution, but some are actually identical failures within a template that's generating over and over again. So we're combining them. So we have a count that shows you the combined failures. That means this failure happened at least twice already. And then you can uncombine by clicking here to uncombine so that you can see all the information in the exact order that it happened. It's totally up to your preference. Then we have a search capability. So let's say you just cared about backgrounds, like you wanted to see which of your backgrounds were failing. You can just type the word background. In other words, any of these fields it works with. We also added a right-click menu now. You can copy the original error. You can copy any of the columns. You can reset the columns. You can clear the filters. Resetting of the columns was very useful because you can move the columns around and you can change their size. You can really break this thing to be kind of weird. And if you're like, man, oops, I didn't mean to do all of that, you can reset columns, and now all of your columns are back, and your data is not lost when we do that operation. So we're really fine-tuning to try to make this thing better and better. We also added something I don't have a demo for handy here, but we added a capability to show you call stacks within certain kinds of exceptions. I'll make sure this app gets updated to show that as well in the future. But basically, it'll be like a little expander. You can click on it, and we'll expand out to show you the binding failures there as well.
And we have a question in the chat. Does double-clicking on the list take you to the XAML source where with the binding error?
Yeah, really good question. Unfortunately, no. You would think, well, that's an obvious feature. Doesn't the team just add it? The reason why is because we had to make some hard choices. We could have said that we can't make this experience perfect, and therefore we could have just not built it. But we over a course of doing customer interviews and a lot of brainstorming in the team, talking to partners, we realized that this experience has value even if it's not 100%. Let's call it the 80% of the experience. That is, we're letting you know that a binding is failed with the icon. I know this is super helpful to lots of people that miss failures and it causes them delay to resolve the issue. And we've made the visualizing and sifting through the failures easier. That's the goal of this panel. But the click to code requires source info. That is the technical term for knowing where an error is in source, which file, which line number, which column, all of that information. And today we don't have it. We are literally parsing the output window data. And when we detect a binding has failed in the output window, we are making it be visualized better by showing an icon and showing this grid. And over time, we're hoping to work with various frameworks to add that capability. So in order for us to get source info, Xamarin, UWP, WPF, WinUI would have to add some code, basically. And that's our current understanding, at least. Like, we're looking for creative solutions. We haven't found one that we would be happy with shipping, but basically once that happens, then clicking the code would work. We're really hoping that Xamarin will be the first place where we do get that work completed, that we're exploring that this summer. Just give us some time. Hopefully I'll be able to demo that capability, but we want this feature as much as you. One of the things that we're considering is adding a fuzzy search capability. So maybe if you double click and we don't know where source is, maybe for some of these errors, we can figure out how to open up the Visual Studio Control F, search feature and search your source with possible matches to like the target name or something like that. Like we're exploring, but again, like everything takes work. We decided to kind of stabilize this first, if that makes sense. All right, so with that, I'm going to switch over to a feature that did not exist until 16.7 Preview 3, the most recent preview. So I did show you some improvements for this experience, the data binding that shipped in Preview 3, but this is an existing experience that continued to get refined and will continue to be refined even in the next preview. But I'm going to switch gears to a feature that's completely new, which is our design time data. I'm really excited about this feature because it really opens up a whole new realm of possibilities for XAML developers who are building desktop applications. So let's talk about what is design time data before I get into nitty gritty. Basically, it is a feature that the Xamarin Forms team put into their XAML previewer first. So Xamarin has had this feature and we did not have the feature. And when we were doing explorations for where customers were less than satisfied, one of the areas we heard from many customers was, when I'm just building my app, yes, it's great when I can run the app, and yes, you have a designer that lets me see where the controls are laid out, and yes, using hot reload, I can change XAML against my running app with real data, and that's all great. But there's still scenarios where you're either just doing some rapid prototyping of a view which doesn't really have a real view model or data behind it, or situations where your solution is maybe so large that starting Visual Studio and getting to the point of hot reload is difficult on a regular basis. So you just want to have at least some capability to make your app in the designer sort of look more real so that you can change the XAML and have at least more confidence before you go into the F5 inner loop. So with that feature, we realized that we should add design time data support that the Xamarin team had as well. And look at that, I just realized I have a bug in my title there. Let's get rid of one of the extra T's. It was driving me crazy. Yeah, there you go, data. So yeah, so design time data is that feature. And the way that it works, let me go up to the namespace, is that we have already had a feature in Visual Studio called the ignorable namespace capability, and we've extended it beyond what it supported before we made this change. So we used to have the data context that you could mock. So if you're willing to create a fake view model, you could attach it to your view and that would work. So that feature we haven't made any worse or better. In other words, that feature still exists. You can still add a fake view model. But what we're talking about is like before that, like you don't even have a view model, or you don't want to bother with it at the moment, or you just want to try something. Like you just want to see what would that look like in my application without going into the point where you need to generate data to create that view. So we added this capability of changing any single property inside of any control using the D colon. So this in your current like release version of Visual Studio, this will not work. But if you install update 16.7 preview 3, this works, where I say D colon text, and then I can add any text I want, and then the designer renders the text. And even for like the password box, right? I added the word test, and there it's appearing using the character I chose. That's not the character that my real app will use. And my password is probably never set in my XAML because I want people to enter the password for real. So I've added this design time data. Now if I remove it, it goes away. If I put it back in, it appears. If I type D colon, I can change any property. So if let's say I want to make the background red, there you go. My background is now red. Now it's only red in design time. What happens when I hit F5? Well, let's take a look. So I hit F5. What does my application look like? In this case, my app has no real data. It looks really, really empty. So now my designer is actually richer than my running application, and that's what we're trying to do. So let me show you some examples of the more complex scenarios where I did this. I'll start from the top because there's one interesting feature that I really love actually is show grid lines for grids. I love having this on. And when I used to build, I used to be like a WPF developer for real. Like I used to, like that used to be my day job. And I used to turn this on. And occasionally I'd forget and check this in, and then my real app would have a grid line where it shouldn't have a grid line. I've done that at least twice in my career. So now I can say D colon show grid lines, and that will never make it into my running app. When we compile an application, when we find a D colon property, we ignore it. We don't compile it, so it doesn't make it into your real application. So it's really safe way to add a bunch of data. Its only downside is it makes your XAML a little bit bigger, but it adds so much capability. Hopefully, everybody will enjoy this feature from that standpoint. So that's one thing I can show.
That sounds super handy for me. And we have a question in the chat.
Please.
We're asking, how does the colon work with attached properties?
So D colon should work with anything that's a property, including attached properties. Like after you type D colon, we're just giving you access to all the things that are properties, attached properties afterwards. Download my sample app, give it a try. If something isn't working for you, let us know. The one limitation we have today is that this is not yet ready to work with third-party control vendors or in a few other kind of niche scenarios. We will document more of this as the weeks go on. This feature is very hot off the presses, and we have a couple of things that are on the roadmap versus things that are known issues that will be resolved in the next couple of previews. So I won't be able to answer every question in super detail, but we are building that documentation set. We'll have it up somewhere pretty soon. It's a good question.
Thanks.
All right,
awesome.
so one of the advantages with D colon that I want to demonstrate with this text block is that text block is an interesting example. In fact, let's add a text block, a brand new one. Let's give it a width of 100. Let's give it a height of 25. Oops, not height of 25, and let's give it a margin of 10. That's what I do for all the controls here. It just kind of looks nice. And then I'm going to say text, and I'm going to say test. So you could ask me, like, why did we need a D colon? Like, you already have the ability to show text right here, like this works, but that's not real world, right? In the real world, when you're starting to build an application, that text will be very quickly removed with some sort of binding. That's the reality for a lot of things. And therefore, D colon lets you have your real XAML in here with the bindings that do not get affected for your running application, while the D colon allows you to mirror that property and put any text you want and have no binding. So it allows you to have this property twice in your control, one for design time and one for not design time. And this works for complex controls. Like if, let's say, you have a rich text box where the only way to mock some data is to create the documents node, then add a flow document, then add a paragraph, and do all the complexities that I've added here. Yeah, right here, it's fully possible. We can D colon down the line, and everything will appear. And then when you run the application, all this will get stripped out. Next, if we go to something more complex like lists, once again, you can start using the namespace of system to start adding strings, for example. So here I have a list view, I have a list box, and I have a tree view, and each one has been, has design time data in it. And in fact, the list view has an item template selector. And if you look at my item template selector, it's really simple. If it detects that it's Donovan, it makes the template return as the bold template versus everyone else gets a non-bold template. And then when I look at my designer, I actually get to see that. So I get to see that if it's Donovan here, let's add Donovan multiple times. And I can see what this will look like if Donovan appeared multiple times. I can see that what happens if I add enough items that the scroll bar will appear. It really gives me a much richer way to understand what my application will look like when it's running. Do I need to make it bigger because of the scroll bar, etc.? Like all of these things, are good candidates. Like here, I'll make the scroll bar a permanent fixture of the sample because I think that's a good example. So Ollie, there you go. Welcome to my list of names here.
Yay, I made it.
Yeah, you made it. Congratulations. And then we have an even more complex scenario where it's a data grid, and the data grid has a real binding that it's going to attach to eventually, and this binding requires a model. This model is right here. We have a model which has a bunch of properties on it. There's a public enumeration, starting to look even more real like an application, and I'm able to mock all of that up under a fake data source using just a simple array from the X namespace, array extensions, and then I can create the model right here in line. And my properties window actually even shows me all the public properties of that. So it's really, really easy. If there's an enumerations, look at that. It supports dropdowns from the properties window and everything. So I can enter all this information through the properties window or here, and then I can create as many of these as I want, and they start appearing. Now, there is one limitation, is once you create an entity in here, if you change that entity, let's say I want to change this to Steve, it doesn't update because there's no event that fires to say that this entity has changed to the XAML designer. And this is where I can demo another feature we've added to the XAML designer called the refresh button. This is a feature that was customer requested. If you click the button, Steve appears because what this feature actually does is the same set of keystrokes as if you closed the designer and reopened it. So it flashes for a second, and it's actually pretty quick for these My Simple views. And then the view appears and it's refreshed. Now, this is useful for some really complex applications or this kind of design time data limitation scenario where just something doesn't update that you want to see if it updated. So now this refresh button gives you access to that. So I hope that's a useful feature. And now if I go through some more examples, we have plenty of times where we want to see controls in different kind of states. So let's say you want to see what your app looks like when you have both a regular button and one button that's disabled. And let's say this is a real app where you have two buttons next to each other. I can use design time data to set is enabled to false. And therefore, I can see both examples in my app, even if this is really triggered based on state or conditions or data, etc. So that's really useful. And again, I can always do this and still have the real property bound to something that is real and concrete. And this works for radio buttons, checkboxes, slider controls. I have an image. So this is an image that is inside of a folder that's in my application. So yeah, I have to carry this in my source tree. That's the one limitation we have. But it's not compiled into the running app. And this image appears, and you can see what it looks like. So if there's a binding that eventually loads a real image from a data source, you can now see what that could look like with some sample images you include in your project. And then it works with things like calendar controls. What if you want to see what your calendar looks like on a specific year, month, for the selected date, a calendar picker, what it looks like when you set a date here. What about a progress bar? You want to see what a particular value would look like. Is the bar big enough, small enough, etc. And even for things like status bars. What if you want to see what a certain text or entry in there looks like? So this is all the capability that we have today, and we really hope people test it. It's a feature that we're really trying to make great before we ship it, so it'll be in preview as long as necessary. And we have lots of things we're still improving, and it's not the end of our journey if everything goes as planned. Of course, sometimes things don't, but we hope to even add more capability, and if something becomes more real, we'll talk to you. But I hope that even at this point, this is already useful. Please give it a try. And yeah, thank you for being our customers on our preview channel. It's really appreciated by us. So that's it for me for today. I will say, I do have one more thing, is that extensibility. So we have a GitHub repo for extensibility. And when if I mentioned this earlier, sorry, I forget if I did, but suggested actions is being developed in a way that's extendable. That's the feature I talked about earlier, where you can go to a common control in Visual Studio. Let's use the text box as an example. We have a new light bulb. You click the light bulb and you get all the common properties right here that you could change with visualizers of some of them, etc. Really useful feature. Really early in development. We're still working on it, but this feature is going to be extendable. And the way that people can learn about their extendability is by going to this GitHub repo called XAML Designer Extensibility, where we put all our XAML Designer related extensibility information, and that's where you can find more info when that info becomes available. All right, now for real, I think that's it for me.
Are you sure?
Pretty sure.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Those were great features, and guys who are watching us, please check them out and give us feedback, because it's in development. We still listen to what users say, and we are tailoring the experience according to what the feedback we are getting. So please check them out. Let us know what is the best way of providing a feedback for us, Dmitry, for those features.
Yes. So there's definitely the formal way, which is click on the top right button to give feedback and just report any problems you're seeing. That will get routed to the right person in the team. If you, for any reason, don't feel that comfortable with that, you can always go over Twitter and just tweet at me some information. But the challenge there is that if telemetry is required for me to understand more information, I'm going to have to bug you with a lot of questions, and sometimes our repro ability will be hampered by not having that feedback requests officially submitted. So I recommend the feedback mechanism. But if you just want to say that you love the feature, we'd love to hear from you. That's really helpful. A lot of times the positive gets kind of lost, and we needed to make sure we're on the right track. But also, if you just want to give me, ask a question or give me some feedback, you can start on Twitter. It really is a place that I'm really active, so I'll try to answer your questions.
And we already have one feedback. It says being able to move the scroll bar in WPF Designer would be great. So here's one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex L. And yeah, please report feature requests. That's what we are looking at. That's how we prioritize our roadmap and agenda. And there was another question about WPF repository, and that's actually was something that I wanted to talk about today, but we are going through internal reorgs, and unfortunately COVID didn't help us. Was like what we planned did not happen.
Yeah.
But we have a new PM on WPF platform team, and Prima Lini. She will be our guest on the next stand-up, and by then the WPF platform team is going to publish the roadmap. It should happen by the end of the month, so very shortly. And she will talk about all the struggles that they encountered in the WPF repo and about their new plans, agenda, roadmap, and so on. And I will not steal her content. I just want to say very big thank you everyone who reported your issues, who suggested PRs. We will definitely look at every single of them. There are technical difficulties due to which we couldn't do it before, and Primalini will go into more details regarding it, but please keep being engaged. We will definitely get to every single PR, and we really, really appreciate your help. And both on WinForms and WPF repositories, it was a great help from your side. Thank you so much for that. All right, let's look through the questions and comments.
Yeah, so one of the questions that came in was, I guess a suggestion that we should have more news around UWP and blends. So this this stand-up is trying to capture, whatever news we think is most relevant, most new. In terms of like tooling ownership, between Ole and I, we are the PMs that own things like the blend experience, tooling for UWP and WPF. And Xamarin Forms as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and WinForms. Yeah, it's a lot. So yeah, we won't be able to answer every question. Some things are platform decisions. If the UWP team in Windows makes a decision, we can't always speak to that 100%, and that's why we invite guests, just like we're talking about inviting PMs from other parts of Microsoft and all their complexity, trying to kind of simplify that and bring it to you. But yeah, we're definitely telling you everything that's new. We would not hide something new. If we shipped a new feature in Blend, you'd hear about it here. We would not be hiding it.
Yeah, and for when the next stand-up will be, there was a question in the chat. It will be on 23rd of July, so in a month. And it's usually the last Thursday of the month is desktop community stand-up. So please join us. We will have Primalini talking about WPF repository and WPF platform roadmap. And we will also have another guest, Jeremy and probably Arthur. They will talk about Entity Framework Core and what new happened in that area. So I'm very excited to have them as guests as well.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions that we need to answer?
Yes.
There was a question about WPF PM's Twitter account. I'm not sure if they have one. At least I have not run into it before. But if I do, I can try to post it somewhere.
Wait a month and we will have her as a guest, and then you'll be able to talk to her and she can share all the ways how she prefers to be reached out. Yeah. Right. What is your favorite song right now?
I have a pretty active playlist myself on Spotify that I grew up on alternative and rock and metal, and then somehow in my late 20s I became a fan of house and trance and techno. So that's kind of where I am nowadays. If you really want my playlist, I'm pretty sure I can find a way to share it there. Aurelia, what about you? What do you listen to nowadays?
I miss traveling so much because usually I travel a lot, and due to the quarantine, I've been staying at home for a long time. So lately, I just Google in YouTube summer mix or some vacation mix, and I just listen to that and imagine.
Pretend you're somewhere nicer without without being stuck at home. I hear you.
Alright. Oh, Baby Shark. Alright. Thank you for sharing. I think we don't have any other questions. So I think we can end this episode. And thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to see you guys in a month. We will have more guests and more news for you. And you can always reach us on Twitter. Do you want to post our Twitter handles just in case?
Yeah, let's do it. Yes, and thank you everybody for joining. Keep your questions coming, and we'll see you again next month.
Yes. Thank you guys. Have a great day. Bye-bye.